I'm Scott Sampson here at Brigham Young University with some awesome MBA students. And I am delighted to talk about something that I think is very important. I think both to us as students and also both to us as a nation in terms of what we do in our economy. The largest portion of our economy, of course, is the service economy. It's 80% of GDP and employment. It's also probably the least productive portion of our economy. So today, we're going to talk about designing great services. And it relates to the topic of service operations management, as you're covering in your MBA 530 class. Great services. We see them everywhere, don't we? Think of this. Call centers. Has anybody here had experience with a call center in the last few months? Has anybody had a really great experience with a call center in the last few months? I see a few hands up here. What about like this? You know, you're calling in the call center, there's a whole row of people waiting there to help you out, and all they can think of is, thank you for calling Comcast or whomever. I hope you haven't been waiting long. How can I help you? What can I do to make your life more pleasant? Is that what you experience with call centers? Not so much. What about something like this? Hello, do you mind if I put you on hold again? Will I talk with my supervisor? And I don't mean this to make any implications about our call centers, but the call centers very often are designed in a way that just lead to frustration. They're outsourced, they're put in conditions that really don't focus much on satisfying customer needs. Call centers are often designed to disappoint. What about financial institutions? Banks, credit unions, mortgage companies? You know, think about this. Think about the last time you went in your bank. Is this what you thought? I love coming to this bank. It makes me feel confident in my life. You feel that? Yeah, I see some head shaking like this. Or is it more like this? And this was actually an experience that I went through. I had my credit card stolen. And they told me, that's too bad your credit card number was stolen. If you'll just fill out this affidavit forms and bring them back, we can process them at our home office and reissue the card, and then you can go on with your life. It took weeks to get my money back from my that credit card fraud. And as I thought about that, I thought, this process sucks. I don't even think they knew about it. I mean, the person was very friendly. They were very, willing to spend time with me, but the process was so horrible that it just gave the impression that the organization didn't even care. Now, financial institutions, I believe, are prone to disappoint customers, and I have evidence for that. This is from a Harris survey in 2010. It revealed that more and more Americans say they don't believe a word that banks and credit card companies are telling them. And here's some data that they had. They surveyed 2,755 U.S. adults, and they found that for banks, 4% of the customers completely believe the bank, 57% somewhat believe, and 39% they don't believe really what the bank is telling them. It's even worse here for credit card companies. A whopping 2% actually completely believe what credit card companies tell them. 34% somewhat believe, but the majority weren't in those categories. So we're clearly doing something wrong in the design of financial institutions. Airlines, of course, that's a kind of a bright side. We have great experience with airlines, don't we? Yeah. We like this. It's always fun to get to the airport and kind of have this good back to nature feeling, like you're in a cattle yard being herded through to the slaughter. We're checking in there. You ever had this experience where you're checking in and it's just like nothing's going right, the flight's been changed, they can't connect your bags through, or you've lost your bags or something like that. Go through TSA. Of course, we all know what a high point that can be to a day there. Take you through the process. And then here we are actually at the gate, checking in. Now, this is a true story that happened to my family this last year. We showed up at the gate, my family did, this was in the UK, and the Air France person told them, it looks like your flight's been canceled. We can put you on the flight tomorrow, so make yourself comfortable. And they basically stranded my wife and 4 of my kids in the airport there in the UK. I was off giving a lecture that day, so I hadn't completely abandoned my family that day. But Air France had left them hanging at the airport. And it was only on the insistence of my wife that they finally put my family up in a hotel so they wouldn't have to spend the whole day at the airport until the next day. The point of this is, as we go through airport experiences and airline experiences, we often come away with this feeling, hey, this airline really sucks. There's really something wrong here about the design of this service. And I think we can go through numerous examples in retail, examples in healthcare, and we find out that very often the process really seems to be designed to disappoint us. So, let's think about this. Lots of different service industries, 80% of our economy, 80% of our GDP. The majority of the jobs for MBA graduates are going to be in the service sector. We find out there's a few standouts, companies that do well. There's many companies that flounder, many that confuse. Often it's arduous processes we have to go through, often untrustworthy, and services are often designed to disappoint. Do you have that feeling? Yep. Why is that the case? Any thoughts? Why do you think services are so poorly designed? Please, back here.
They're designed to save money a lot of the time.
Okay, maybe they're focusing too much on efficiency, saving money. Other thoughts, please.
They're designed for legal compliance.
Okay, maybe they're under some restrictions. The government requires them to give bad service and hassle you and shortchange you. Another comment back here.
Harder to measure productivity as compared to like a factory.
Oh, so maybe there's something about the productivity or the process. Now factories, on the other hand, how do we measure productivity in a factory?
Output, how much?
Yeah. We look at how much we put out. We may look at the cost relative to what the value add of the goods is and so forth. Services, it might be a little bit more difficult. In fact, that is the same. Here's an example. Someone calling themselves a customer says they want something called service. What is service? You know, what is service productivity? What does that really mean? That's a difficult question. So the outline of my presentation is going to have three parts. The first part is, what is service? We need to address this question, what is service? And that will lead us to other important issues such as what is service productivity? What is service design? What is service quality? The second part, why are services so poorly designed? And finally, how can we design great services? And I really want to spend the most of the time on this third one because that's really what we're here for, is to learn how to do a better job. So, first, what is a service? Now, there's a lot of questions that we ask ourselves in life that consume a lot of pondering and meditation and so forth. They include things like this. Why isn't there a synonym for synonym? Have you thought about that? Every word in the English language has a synonym except for synonym. I don't know. Why don't sheep shrink when it rains? You know, wool clothing shrinks when it rains, when they get wet, but sheep don't shrink. Doesn't make sense. When police when they arrest mimes, do they tell them that they have the right to remain silent? I don't know. When sign makers go on strike, who makes their signs? Why is the word abbreviation so long? Is it to force the point that you have to abbreviate it? I don't know. And finally, what is a service? Now, all of these are important questions that consume a lot of our, perhaps, mental activity, or not. But the one we're going to focus on today for this first part is, what is service? So, what is service? Give me just a few thoughts here. What is service? Transaction of some kind? Excellent. Please?
Finding a customer's need and satisfying it.
Whoa! Finding a customer's need and satisfying it? I like that. Any others, please?
To me, it's the premium you didn't pay for, I guess.
Okay, maybe a premium. Maybe it's an add-on, perhaps, to a product. Okay, good. Well, let's go to the dictionary. This is from the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary. I actually looked this up, and here are the first four definitions of service from the dictionary. Number one, the occupation or function of serving. Okay. Number two, the work performed by one that serves. Okay. Number three, a form followed in worship or in a religious ceremony. Okay, that makes sense, like church services, that makes sense. And number four, the act of serving. Huh? What is this? It sounds to me like you're trying to describe salt. What is salt? What does salt taste like? If I've never tasted salt, what would you tell me about it? It's salty. Oh, thank you. That's real helpful. All right, what are services? I'm going to jump kind of to the chase here. You have some handouts here, and there's other materials. In fact, are any of you in my class next semester, 619? Okay, we'll spend like an entire class period on this next slide, but I'm going to kind of speed things up a little bit, because I really want to get to designing great services. Frankly, there are really two major perspectives on service that are out there. One of them is as an intangible product. People say services they're these intangibles that companies sell to others, to customers. And if you think about it, a service is an intangible product. Is it that much different than a good, which is a tangible product? So we think about automobiles, well, those are goods. They're tangible products. Versus a service like a taxi. It's a service, a taxi service. Is that tangible or intangible? A taxi. Well, it's kind of intangible. Can you touch a taxi? Yeah. But you're not really paying for the taxi, are you? You're paying really for the ride in the taxi, right? What about a car? Do any of you own cars? And you bought that car, right? What did you pay for? Did you pay for the car? Or did you pay for the opportunity to ride in the car? Kind of both, right? When you buy a car, you're really paying for transportation. It's this idea of filling customers' needs, this gentleman here mentioned earlier. So in fact, I would wonder, in terms of tangibility or intangibility, is there that much difference between buying a car or taking a taxi? They both seem to be tangible, but in both cases, we seem to be making the purchase largely for an intangible benefit, the benefit of transportation. Does that make sense? Whoa, that's interesting. I mean, think about other services, like, for example, healthcare. Sorry for the gory picture there. Surgery, is that tangible? Can you feel it? Can you touch it? Yeah, absolutely. Look at a car on an assembly line. Yeah, that's tangible. Which is more tangible? Having surgery or buying a car? Yeah. They're both pretty darn tangible, aren't they? What about airline service? Have you ever had a tangible experience in the comfort of a chair, a seat there? The tangible feeling of something banging up against your knees, which is the seat in front of you? Okay. What about food services? Okay. Think about all the tangible elements there. What would food services be without food? Service master cleaning services. What about auto repair? Is that a tangible service? Is it a service? Sure. Is it tangible? Very tangible. So what we find is describing services as being intangible is blatantly wrong. It actually leads to some false conclusions because we assume that service is all about, something that's fleeting, something that's ephemeral. But it's really, there's a lot of tangible elements to services. So the second perspective on service that's out there is this idea of an interactive process, which means a service is a co-productive process, and I'll describe that term in more detail in a few minutes, that involves provider and customer interactions. So let's think about this in these examples here. When I go to a restaurant, is there any interaction between me and the provider? Sure. I'm interacting with their facility. I may be interacting with their employees. What about cleaning services? They may be interacting with my facility. Auto repair, they're interacting with my car. Transportation services, I may be interacting with their transportation equipment and their personnel and so forth, versus a car in an auto factory that may be produced completely without any interaction. Does that make sense? So this is kind of a different view on service. It's the idea that even though there are both tangible and intangible elements to all production processes and all operations, really we find that services involve interaction. So there's three types of interaction that services involve. One is people interaction. So here's an example, Disney. Any of you been to Disneyland or Disney World in the last year or two? Wow, that's nice. A lot of you get out. How does Disneyland work? Did you say you've been to Disneyland?
Yeah.
Okay, how does it work? How does Disneyland work?
The theme park that you pay a fee to get in.
Okay.
Rides and different forms of entertainment.
Okay, what are their operations? What is the operation of Disneyland?
What do you mean by operation?
Well, we have like some resources, we have things that we do to them. Disneyland, do they make cars? No. Do they make iPods? No. What does Disneyland make?
It makes people happy.
They make people happy. Yes. And how do they do that?
By providing entertainment.
By providing entertainment. So here's one way we can look at Disneyland. So Disneyland has inputs, resources such as equipment, energy, labor, capital, and so forth. So they have various inputs into the process. And they have another input, which is you, right? The customer. So the customer is an input to the process. In what way is the customer different going into Disneyland from going out of Disneyland? Is there any difference? Okay. They're less happy? Before or after? Okay. I was thinking you were saying after. So let's think about that. We go into Disneyland, we're stressed out from school or work or whatever. We just need a break. We have a nice thick wallet before we go in, right? Loaded with cash. We go into Disneyland. They relieve us of our heavy wallet. That's nice. They entertain us. They take us on rides. They take us on roller coasters and all kinds of things like that. And we leave Disneyland happier, hopefully. Maybe tired, but happier, right? Disneyland may be the happiest place on earth, but the business they're in is making people happy. They are a people factory. And if you don't believe me, just go there for their early entry days and see how many people are lined up to get on that Toy Story ride. It's a factory there. They crank people through, they put them through an experience, they process people. So one category of services we see is people processing services. There's another category which could be belonging processing services. Things like auto repair is an example of that. You take your car in, auto repair is really about processing a customer's broken car. Or at the airline, like baggage, we have baggage transportation services, processing people's belongings. The third category is information processing services. So we have three types of services. We have services that process people, services that process their belongings, and services that process their information. So this is the perspective on services we're going to use today. The perspective is that when we're designing services, we're really designing a people processing or a customer processing system. Does that make sense? All right. So I think if we answered number one, is it okay to go on? All right. Let's go to number two. Why are services so poorly designed? I mean, if you think about it, think about if your car was designed as bad as call centers are designed, or as bad as healthcare services are designed. They wouldn't work half the time. Half the time they wouldn't get you where you need to go. They take you on tremendous detours and have you call the auto manufacturing supervisor every few minutes to rectify problems that are happening in the system. Okay, so why are services so poorly designed? Well, this is from something that comes out of the University of Michigan. It's called the American Customer Satisfaction Index. They do a massive survey of tens of thousands of consumers every year to find their perceptions of quality across different sectors of the economy. And here's some of the scores. At the top, we have manufacturing of durable and non-durable goods. They have scores that are in the 80s. Next, we have e-commerce, accommodation, healthcare. They have kind of lower scores in the 70s and one that's in low 80s. Then we have energy, utilities, finance, insurance, retail, trade, a little lower. Finally, e-business, transportation services, and information services. Now, this is quite interesting. Because if we look at this, we see that manufacturing is at the top of the scale. In the U.S., manufactured goods are considered to be very high quality, very high satisfaction levels with customers, whereas all the ones that do poorly are all of the services. So this is another indication of this problem, that services lack a lot of the quality, a lot of the design that we typically expect to experience in manufacturing. So I'm going to do a little bit of comparison between goods and services. Now, if we think about design, who is responsible for design? So who designed, for example, my Acer computer here? Or who designed my, Reebok shoes or whatever? Who designs things? Okay, engineers. Typically design engineers. So if we're talking about product design, we have these people called engineers. Do we have any engineers in the room? Okay, a number of you. Excellent. And engineers, they have degrees in engineering. So engineers, who are you? Do you have a degree in engineering? What kind of engineer are you? Mechanical. A mechanical engineer, okay. And why did you get a degree? Here, let me get you a microphone here. What's your name?
Brian.
Brian. Why did you get a degree in engineering? Why didn't you just go become an engineer?
I needed to learn the fundamentals of physics and math.
Okay. So you need to learn kind of fundamentals, perhaps some tools to that. All right. And have you worked as an engineer?
Yes.
Did you have a business card?
Yes.
What did it say on the business card?
Mechanical engineer.
Mechanical engineer. Okay? So engineers, they have degrees, they learn all the tools, their business cards say things like design engineer, mechanical engineer on it. Cool. Okay, what about service design? Who designs the process at a bank or at a healthcare organization or at a university? Who do you think? Who designs them? It is, please?
Management?
No, who designs them? Not who leads them, not who directs them. Who designs them?
IT?
IT? What about engineers? I thought engineers now, where did you work as a mechanical engineer?
At a manufacturer.
At a manufacturer. Did management design the products?
No.
No. Did IT design the products? No. Did the marketing department design the products?
No.
Why not? Why did you hog all the design decisions?
I guess I have a background in Acer expertise.
Oh. So why is it at most service organizations we turn it over to management or IT or whomever? Why do you think? Is there such a thing as a service engineer? Has anybody here ever met a service engineer? I actually wrote a chapter in a book on service engineering, but I have actually, to this day, never actually met one. They're maybe like dodo birds or something. I don't know. Where do they get their training? Where do you learn how to be an engineer? This semester I'm teaching a bunch of accountants. And I've asked them, hey, who designs the process at accounting firms? And you know what the answer is? They just are. They're just there. Huh? What if at your manufacturing firm, you said, well, let's just let the products design themselves? Okay? What are the titles of people that design? Maybe they're called management. Maybe they're called the marketing department. I don't know. Okay, what about where does design take place? So at your firm, where did design take place? Where did the product design occur?
In my office?
In your office. Whoa! Was it something like this?
Yes.
So you're kind of sitting up to a computer there, working on things. Cool! So if you want to learn about engineering, it's like if you have a teenage child who wants to do day on the job, you say, hey, I want to be an engineer. I actually have a son that wants to be an engineer. And if I took him to a manufacturing firm, we say, hey, could I see your engineering department? They say, yes, it's just right over here. You open the door and there's a bunch of people doing engineering. They're doing design work. Cool. What about service design? Where does that take place? In an engineering department? Does a university have an engineering department? Yeah, they're teaching engineering. Who designs the processes? Do hospitals have engineering departments? They actually do. What do they do in an engineering department at a hospital? They fix the heating system and the air conditioning system. It's a little bit different there. Okay? Is there such a thing as a service engineering department? Okay, what's the process? So product design, you've probably had this in some other class like your marketing class. If you want to design a new product, what do you do first? What did you learn in your marketing class? Okay, ideation. You identify a market need. Try to figure out some ideas about perhaps where you can add value somewhere. Okay, then you turn it over to the engineers, you prototype it, you design the product, maybe design a production process, you test it, then you release it into production. Wow, cool. And that's the next great item that's being sold. What about service design? What are the steps to service design? What would the first step be, do you think? Okay, yeah, find the need again. Then what? What's that? Turn it over to the engineers if we can find them. Yeah, if they're not out fixing the heating and air conditioning system or something. See, we don't know. So this is the point. The point I'm making here is the reason service design is so bad in this country is that we don't have systematic ways to design services. We leave it as kind of a random process. Thank you for your help. All right. So hopefully, I'm going to skip over the slide about the tools. I'm going to jump right to service design. Service design is often disappointing. Service design is usually lacking until now. So this is a day we're going to talk about service design. And I'm going to spend the entire rest of the time talking about service design. What are services? Why are services so poorly designed? Are you comfortable? You ready to move on? All right. Third and final topic, how can we design great services? The tool we're going to use for designing great services is called Pcn Analysis, and I'm going to introduce this in this next series of slides. A service, I said previously, is a co-productive process. Co-production means that we have interaction. In particular, the interaction is between a provider and a customer. When I go to the hospital for some kind of treatment, there's a provider, there's me as the customer. We interact to produce the outcome, which is hopefully better health. When I go to a restaurant, there's me, the customer, there's the provider. They have resources, I have needs. We work together. We co-produce to produce the result, which is hopefully a well-fed and satisfied customer. So the example I'm going to use today, in fact, is a restaurant example. This is a pizza restaurant, is this example. And this is the server here with some pizza. Now, where does pizza come from? Does anybody know where pizza comes from? What's that? Italy, okay. It comes from Italy. This particular one actually comes from Provo, this pizza comes from Provo. Well, it turns out, as magical as restaurants are, they actually have processes that deliver those products to us. And I'm going to use that as an example. The process we're going to look at is pizza, which in fact comes from, believe it or not, a kitchen. Pizza comes from a kitchen. It just doesn't magically appear on our table. Where did the kitchen get the pizza? What? They made it from what? Okay? They might have had a customer order and some flour and other supplies. So there's other supplies that are there that go into this. Where did those supplies come from? Okay, a supply chain, sure. So there's some kind of distribution system here, the Cisco truck or whatever. They provide those supplies, which may be based on some contract that was negotiated. So in fact, to get that pizza, which is kind of a product coming out of that restaurant process, we have an entire supply chain, a set of steps that go into delivering that process. A process being a sequence of dependent steps. Does that make sense? You've probably seen this before. In fact, here's an example of this. This is a flow chart. Have many of you seen flow charting before? Have you had that in some other class? So probably most of you have. So we have steps such as receiving supplies, ordering supplies online, and so forth. We have taking the order, serving the pizza, cooking the pizza. We can't cook the pizza until we take the order because it's a make-to-order pizza. We can't cook the pizza until we preheat the oven and so forth. So that's a flow chart. That's just an example, a very simple flow chart that depicts a process. Okay? Now, let's think about these steps a little bit. The steps are verbs. Process steps are verbs followed by nouns. We have the arrows that represent a relationship between the steps. That's really all we need to know in order to create a flow chart, a relatively simple flow chart. Now, this is something new. This is what I'm going to call a process entity. This entity, it could be an individual, it could be an organization, it could be a department of an organization. It is an organization that has what's known as a process domain. The process domain includes all of the processes that are directly performed, controlled, managed, executed by that process entity. The process entity has these little vertical lines which make it kind of look like a bank. It's not a bank necessarily. I'll describe those lines in just a few minutes. So, let's look at our pizza restaurant. This shape here represents the pizza restaurant's process domain. And in fact, I can superimpose that flow chart on the process domain and have some interesting insights here. So here we have receiving supplies, ordering supplies, forecasting needs, cooking pizza, taking orders, serving pizza, and so forth. There are 3 regions of the process domain. So you should have all this little handout leaflet thing. If anybody doesn't have a copy of that, there should be some more copies somewhere in the back. So this stuff is all reviewed in the handout there, so you don't have to take too many notes here. In the process domain, we have 3 regions. At the extremities of the process domain, we have what I'm calling direct interaction, meaning that we interact with the supplier, perhaps, or perhaps with the customer. So we're interacting with the customer here, taking the order, serving the pizza, interacting with the supplier, negotiating a contract, receiving supplies. We have a region of direct interaction. Next to that, we have a region that's called surrogate interaction. Surrogate interaction means that we're interacting with another entity, but not person to person. Instead, we're interacting with their resources, perhaps their information, perhaps their belongings. So when we cook the pizza, we're actually not cooking the customer, we're cooking the customer's order. Here we're ordering supplies online. We're actually not interacting with our supplier, we're interacting with their technology in that particular case. And finally, in the middle, we have a region known as independent processing. These are things that we do independently, independent from suppliers, independently from customers. These are kind of our internal operations. Now, if you've been taking this operations management class this semester, my guess is the bulk of what you've been studying has been in this region here. This is really the traditional operations of a firm, or the internal operations of a firm. But when we talk about service operations, we're really talking about operations that interact with other entities, either through surrogate or direct interaction. So here we look at these regions of the process domain. We see that shape at the top is a triangle. The reason it's a triangle, it's not a roof. Some people think, oh, that kind of reminds us that it's an entity doesn't have to be an organization or a physical type of entity. It could be just a person, it could be an entity. The shape of the roof reminds us about process control. Because the fact is processes that are closer to the center of a process domain, those processes in independent processing, the organization typically has greater control over those processes. And the closer they get towards the regions of direct interaction, they have to cede some of that control. Does that make sense? All right. So, to summarize, we have three regions of the process domain. We have direct interaction, people to people. We have surrogate interactions, people acting on resources of other entities. And finally, we have independent processing. That's entities acting on their own resources. So, we're going to now organize this into a network. So what does PCN stand for? It stands for Process Chain Network. The process chain means that we have a process, a sequence of steps, number of process entities, each with their own process domain, and then we have processes that tie them together. And in fact, in the real world, most service systems that deliver service to customers, they typically involve more than just a customer and a provider. They very often involve a customer, providers, other suppliers, and so forth. So here's an example, back to our pizza restaurant. Here we have a pizza restaurant with their process domain and all of their steps. We recognize that, in fact, here we have a supplier that has a process domain that may include things like filling orders and forecasting demand for the things that we'll order and so forth. And of course, down here, the customer has a process domain. And now here's an interesting thing about this. Actually, let me do that again. That's my favorite animation in this entire stack of slides. Can I show it one more time? Yeah. The reason that I like it so much is I have no idea how I got it to work. But it works anyway. So here we have the pizza restaurant with the pizza restaurant's process domain, and the restaurant knows a lot about these things. But you know what? There's some interesting steps that take place over here in the customer's process domain, like developing an appetite, they pay the check, they return home, they eat their leftovers, and so forth. Most organizations that study their processes study them within the confines of their own domain. Only on very rare instances do organizations go outside of their domain and study the processes of their customers, their suppliers, and so forth. But in fact, the processes that take place in customer and suppliers' domains very often can be crucial to us delivering our value proposition. Let me give one brief illustration. A few years ago, I was actually on the way to teach an EMBA class on this topic, and I stopped on the way at a local restaurant. I didn't stop there. I went to their drive-in window to get something to eat. I was kind of in a hurry. I had a few things to get done before I went to class. So I pulled to the drive-in window. I ordered what I wanted. In this case, it was a Nacho Grande. You can probably guess which restaurant it is for those of you from Provo. So I ordered their Nacho Grande, and they put it in a bag for me. I paid for it, and then I headed to my office. I got to my office and I had about 15 minutes worth of work to get done before I had to run to class. So I opened up the Nacho Grande. I reached into the bag to grab the fork so that I could eat while I'm getting work done on my computer. And the fork they provided me was the flimsiest fork I'm sure I've ever seen. Well, what happened there? Yeah, not a lot happened there. So I'm sitting there thinking, I'm hungry, I haven't eaten in a long time. All I have is this flimsy fork to eat with. And I just set it aside. It wasn't going to work. So now, do I get work done? Do I eat? It's kind of this typical, typical hedonistic, do I consume and eat, or do I enrich my mind, or whatever like that? So I ate with one hand, and then I typed on my computer with the other hand. And my hand was just slimy and greasy and stuff like that. But the point of that was, it wasn't about trying to do two things at once. It was about service failure. That particular restaurant failed. They failed to deliver value to me. Why? Why did they fail? Please.
Because you couldn't eat it.
Yeah, I couldn't eat it. I had this beautiful food that I couldn't eat. Why couldn't I eat it? I didn't have a fork. Why didn't I have a fork? I'll tell you why. Because that restaurant, I'm sure, had a good process for managing the production of I don't think they made those nachos with those flimsy forks. They had good forks. But what they did is they managed their internal processes, but failed to understand the customer's process. And the failure there was in the customer's process domain. And this happens all the time. In fact, very often, value for customers is realized in their own domain. But organizations still focus all their design attention on the processes within their own domain. What that means is very often we design processes to disappoint. They are set up to disappoint because they fail to consider the customer's process domain. This is a very important point coming out of this discussion today. When you work in service systems, it's not enough to understand your company's internal operations, your company's internal processes. You have to understand your customer's operations as well as they relate to your operations. Does that make sense? Any questions about that before I proceed? All right, let's go. So, does that matter to the restaurant? Does something in the customer's process domain matter to the restaurant? You bet it does, because it makes the difference between success or failure in that particular service offering. All right, let me show a healthcare example. Here in this healthcare example, we have a health clinic, we have a patient, we have an insurance company, and a pharmacy. And here's a process here. This particular process is actually for getting a diagnosis for something and getting a prescription for it. This is actually a true story. I went to a health clinic because I wasn't feeling well at one time, and they talked to me about my symptoms. They took a blood test, they analyzed that, and they gave me a prescription. So I went through a series of tests. They gave me a prescription. I'm the patient over here. I went over to the pharmacy to have the prescription filled. When I got to the pharmacy, there was a mistake on the prescription. So what happened? What do you think happened if I take a mistake to the pharmacy? Well, yes. You'd think they would send me to go back. In fact, what they did, first the pharmacy guy threatened to call the police. He thought I had doctored a prescription there, that it was prescription fraud. So I gave him a little piece of my mind. And it actually took me about 4 days to get that prescription filled because of lack of communication between the pharmacy and the clinic. I was being the integrator of that process. So I got my prescription, and then, a few months later, I got this letter from my insurance company saying, hey, we noticed you have this prescription. Are you authorized to have that prescription? And I said, yeah, I got it from the health clinic. Well, would you go to your health clinic, have them fill out this form and mail it to us, and then that way we'll cover that prescription for you. So I went down to the health clinic again. I took them the form. They filled that out. I assume they sent it in because the insurance company stopped harassing me. That was a disappointing process. Why was it disappointing? Each entity within their own operations, within their own process domain, had optimized what they were doing. The insurance company, as far as they knew, they were very optimal. The pharmacy, as far as they knew, they were very optimal. Same for the health clinic. And in fact, they may have been optimal within their own domains, but if we look at the share of process across domains, it was a failure. It was poorly designed. Does that make sense? That's what the problem is. We fail in service design to consider the combination of entities that are involved in that process chain. All right. Industrial laundry. This is an interesting one. Briefly, let me tell you this. I was down in Australia consulting on this topic a few years ago. And I was actually down meeting with some people from the Australian government because they're having some problems with economic development right now. And I happened to meet with a person that worked he actually owned a company that was an industrial laundry company. And it was quite interesting because he was this linen service. They had client hotels, and the client hotels had guests. And they had this problem of shrinkage. And the shrinkage basically means is that they would take towels and linens to the hotels, and when they came to pick them up, some of them would be missing. Go figure. And this particular hotel, I was actually staying at one of these hotels, it was right on the beach. So where do you think the towels went? Yeah, they went to the beach. They probably floated out into the ocean and became towels for dolphins or something. I don't know. But we talked about this, and I actually sat down with them. I said, you know what your problem is? It's really not a problem that you have internally here, and it's not even a problem you have with your client hotels. The problem that they had is they failed to consider the entire process. This organization was focusing on their internal operations and the operations of their client hotel without really thinking of the process that the guests go through. And in the process of a couple of days, we actually redesigned the process in a way that would facilitate the guest needs in a way that was superior, but also would decrease the likelihood that the guest actions would disrupt the linen services actions through shrinkage or loss of towels and so forth. So, PCN diagrams are great for studying your processes and related processes of suppliers, customers, and customers. In the case of business-to-business services, it makes a lot of sense to not only understand what your customer's doing, but understand what they're doing with their customers all the way down to the end consumers. So it's kind of a new perspective on supply chain management. It's thinking about the supply chain that takes place between you and those that ultimately benefit from what you do as a service provider. Mortgage company, I'll skip over that one for time. Let's talk about how we design these things. Okay. On a PCN diagram, I have here a provider, so they have a process domain, and a customer that has a process domain here. We have some areas where the provider has their own actions. We call this their internal operations. We have other areas where the customer has their actions, customer's independent processing. Then we have this big region in the middle that we're calling interactive or co-productive actions, which is really where service exists. So when we talk about service design, we're really talking about designing actions that span the interactive regions of a process domain. So, designing interactive processes. I'm going to skip this. No, we'll do this. I'll do this one briefly because I want to get to an example that I think you'll all really relate to. Let's think about Toyota. Toyota produces cars independently. They sell cars through a dealer network, and then we drive cars. Okay, where is production here? Where do we see production taking place in an operational sense? Okay, this is kind of production here, isn't it? So this is the idea of production. We produce value. Now, usually, in the past, you probably call this, we add value, you know. What is operations about? It's about adding value. Well, I'm going to tweak that slightly. Let's call that adding value potential. Because the fact is, making a car does not actually add value until the benefit is realized, which happens to be by the customer. So we produce value potential. This is the service region, so it's interactive. And then finally, over here, we have value realization. For manufacturing organizations, they typically exist in the regions of value potential. They create resources that allow customers to meet their own needs. But in fact, manufacturing organizations don't directly meet customer needs. They enable customers to meet their needs. Does that make sense? So it's another way of thinking about value in a process in one of these kind of service interactions or service supply chains. So the service component here in the middle is really a process that enables those resources to be available to customers for the realization of their value. Does that make sense? All right, so it's another way to kind of think about the operations of a firm. We have some operations that create value potential. We have some operations that facilitate customers receiving that value potential, those resources. And then we have actually, we don't usually call these operations, but we have the customer actions where they actually realize the value. And this is actually true of any product that we have. We think about something like a computer. You know, somebody makes that computer, they're really making a resource that then is distributed through some service channel to customers, that customers are then able to use that independent of the producer to meet their own needs. That's true of clothing, that's true of food items, that's true of automobiles, and so forth. Let me skip these other ones. I have a bunch of other ones, but I want to get to a more integrated example. Okay, a few principles. One, customer value is usually realized in the customer's process domain. That means if we don't understand what the customer is doing, what their processes are of consumption, we probably aren't going to really fully understand how we can deliver value. Therefore, it's important to understand what goes on in customer process domains, and the primary purpose of service interaction is to facilitate value realization. All right, I'm going to skip this next one. Oops. I'm going to skip this next one and move to the example. All right, This next little segment I'm calling strategic process positioning. And what this means is when we design services, there are many options that can be very strategic in terms of defining what value proposition we're delivering to our customers. Let's think about something like investment analysis. Do we have any finance students here in the group? Oh, come on. Don't be shy. You're a finance student? Investment analysis. Do you know anything about it?
A little bit.
Okay. What is investment analysis? What does that mean? What's your name? I'm sorry.
Ben.
Ben. What is investment analysis?
So I would think that in the context of looking at multiple options, maybe 2 or 3 investments.
Okay.
The benefits long-term, both long-term and short-term.
Okay.
Weighing those options.
Whoa.
What your goals are.
Okay, who is you?
If, as an individual consumer,
Yeah.
I have personal investments, but as a company, like treasury,
Okay.
maybe managing cash flows for your company.
Excellent. Okay. So we have a client, an investor, that could be an individual or it could be a firm, and they have, as you mentioned, they have their objectives, short-term, long-term objectives, and so forth, right? And then they might have you, after you get through with your MBA degree, imagine you were an investment analysis. Could you conceivably be an investment analysis?
Maybe.
Okay, maybe. Let's go. I'll go with that. So what do you have? Why does the client need you?
You may have access to more information than the client has.
Ah, you have knowledge. You have more information than the client has, especially for individual investors. So for you, you spend years studying this, you do lots of research. The client has their needs, but doesn't necessarily have that expertise that you have. So where should we put this step for investment analysis? Where in the process domain? We can put it in the provider's domain, in the investor's domain, we can put it in between. Where do you think we should put that? I'll open this up to anybody. Where should we put that step? Analyze investments. Any thoughts? Please.
I'd say the surrogate interaction.
Right here?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That means you're making the decision, but you have to know something about the other person.
Okay. So you have their information, their objectives, maybe their demographics or other information that might suggest a certain type of investment. Excellent. I like that. Is that the only place it could go? Or can we put it somewhere else? Any other thoughts? Please, over here.
Perhaps it could go in independent processing for the provider's process.
Right here?
Yeah, if they're not specifically tailoring it to customers' needs, if it's more broad or general.
Oh, interesting. So like providing general investment analysis like through a newsletter or something like that, or writing a book. Excellent. Okay, so it could go here, it could go here. Could it go anywhere else? Could it go here? Could it go here? Could it go here? Well, let's look at this. Okay, we've already talked about the positioning. Right here, we maybe could produce a newsletter. Like Motley Fool does that, don't they? They produce newsletters that people subscribe to. It's done independently. They do their analysis independently from customers, or maybe writing books or things like that. Susie Orman does a lot of this type of stuff. She writes books and videos and things like that. Here, a gentleman mentioned this, and we might centrally analyze our investments, our client's investment portfolio, which is very often happens. So the analysts, they don't actually directly interact with the clients, but maybe they're interacting with the client's information. What would this be here? Yeah, meeting with clients, like the Merrill Lynch model, the traditional Merrill Lynch model, where you sit down with the clients, you discuss what their options are. It's a little bit more co-productive. In this case, the clients bring their needs and maybe some knowledge. The investor brings their expertise. What about over here? Could it be right here? What would that mean? Please?
It'd be like advising them, like teaching them how to invest.
Yeah, providing them resources. Like, for example, online investing is an example of that. So we provide like online tools. E-Trade is a good example of this. You go onto E-Trade, you interact with their technology to get your investment advice. What about over here? What would this be? Yeah, it's just doing your own research independently. Maybe using a book that you've purchased that was written by some investment expert or things like that. So we look at this, wow, there's a lot of design alternatives. And which of these is best? Well, in fact, we have companies today that are in all of these regions of the process domains, but they're not all performing the same. Some companies are losing money hand over fist, and other companies are making money. Whoa, that's interesting. What this means is strategic process positioning makes a difference. It's strategic in that it defines the nature of our value offering. So, the best value, I'm just going to present a few principles here. We typically have the greatest economies of scale and expertise over here, as this gentleman mentioned. You have more knowledge over here than any particular client would typically have. Over here, we typically have more customization. If the investor is doing their own analysis, they can have the opportunity to do any type of analysis they want. They can read the tea leaves if they want. They can, pick any method that may suit them, even things that may not be, normal practice of investment analysis. In the middle, we have an area of relatively low efficiency, but it shares the characteristics of both expertise and customization. So in some situations, this is actually a very nice alternative to be in because it provides that direct interaction, that share of expertise and customization. And in other cases, this actually can be cost prohibitive. And we've seen a lot of this today. In fact, there's actually entire industries where the business used to be all in regions of direct interaction, and now it's shifting out to regions of surrogate interaction. Can you think of an example of an industry where the traditional model has been direct interaction, but today most of the companies that are prospering are doing indirect surrogate interaction or independent processing? Can you think of any examples? Please.
Travel planning.
Okay, travel planning. Excellent example. I can remember the day where if you wanted to do travel planning, you called up the travel agent or met with them and discussed your alternatives. What do you do today if you want to plan travel? Surrogate interaction. It's much more efficient, much more customization. Please.
Amazon.
Okay, Amazon. Think about retail. In fact, it's kind of interesting reading the news about retail right now, about there's kind of this domino effect of companies falling down or being their profits being destroyed because of Amazon. So we used to go to stores if we wanted to purchase clothing or books or things like that. And these days, we just go online. And we have surrogate interaction. And it's more efficient, it's more customized, and it's taking the lion's share of the growth in the market. Please.
Higher education.
Higher education. Whew! I'm scared that you even mentioned that one. What do you mean, David?
Well, it's typically a classroom model where you have professors teaching students.
Yes?
Classroom moving online.
This is the traditional model here for education, where we interact person to person. What does this mean as we get out here? That's what we're doing today with these cameras here. Hi, audience out there in TV land. Is online learning. In fact, in the first 10 years of this decade, this higher education shrunk by 2%. Higher education, meaning online learning, the for-profit education industry, which largely spearheads online learning, grew by 38%. Universities that are in this domain here are suffering right now. It's very hard to cover your costs. It's very hard to compete. Schools, online schools that provide online learning, they're prospering right now. They're making money hand over fist. And it's a different model. And the point of this, I'm sorry you brought that one up, David, but the point of this is if universities that are in this domain don't consider the strategic implications of being in that domain, they're at risk of being put out of business, or at least the size of their market shrunk precipitously. Does that make sense? All right, so this is called strategic process positioning. In your handout thing, there's some discussion about that you can review later. All right, process design. Let me skip through this. Let me get to a final example here. So here's a few principles. Process positioning has strategic implications. Process positioning defines your value proposition. You can change and improve your value propositioning by repositioning your process. So one last example. Oh, actually, this is the example here. I'm to it. I'm going to talk about personal computers here a little bit. Now, I'm old, I admit it. And when I think about personal computer acquisition, I typically break it down into 4 steps. I'm sure for you young people, it's not quite like this, but for somebody like me. 1, assemble the computer. 2, select a configuration. 3, set up the configuration. And 4, install the application. So I have my Acer computer. And I'm actually persecuted by my colleagues because of this, because they say you should get the latest, super thin or whatever like that. And so I haven't been trendy like that. But I kind of look at this. A computer, if I need a computer, somebody has to assemble it. I have to select the configuration. It has to be set up. And somebody has to install the applications. Okay? So, I have a provider and I have a customer. The provider has computer expertise. The customer is me. Not so much expertise. And we have a need. That need is computing power. All right, so we have these 4 steps. Where do these 4 steps go? Where do you think they go? Well, let's look at a few alternatives. The first one I'm going to do is called Computerland. Have any of you heard of Computerland? You haven't? Am I that old? Okay. Oh, forget that. Okay. Computerland, this was back in 78. Remember 78? You know, jive, talking, you know that kind of stuff? Bee Gees? Okay. Anyway, Computerland was, I believe, the largest computer retailer in the US. And I actually worked for a company, it wasn't Computerland, but later I think they were bought by Computerland. It was called Infomax. And the office was in Walnut Creek, California. Do you have anybody here from California? Anybody from the Bay Area? Okay. Diablo Boulevard in Walnut Creek? Okay, yeah. So anyway, we were there, Infomax. It was Computerland. It was like Computerland. It was a store that you went to buy a computer. And if you wanted a computer in 78, I should say a personal computer, then you had to go to Computerland or something like Computerland. Here's how it worked. First, you would select a configuration. So that's actually not me. Could have been me, though. That's how we dressed back then. Then they would assemble the computer. So you go to Computerland and tell them what you wanted. They would then have their technicians put in the hard drive you wanted, the video card you wanted, and so forth. It was awesome. Then, here we go, putting together the computer. Then they would set up the system with you. When I worked for Infomax, we'd actually sit down with our customers and show them how to get it working, how to get DOS booted, how to put the floppy disk into the disk drive, how to take it out. We show them all this stuff and get their computer going there. We love to do that. In fact, we would even go on site sometimes, sit down with people and kind of show them how to get their computers to work. So again, we did it through direct interaction. Then installing applications, we do that as well. If they wanted to use VisaCalc, did any of you use VisaCalc? Okay. Lotus 123? No. Excel? Yeah, okay. Anyway, before there was Excel, there was Lotus 123, and before that there was VisaCalc, and it was awesome. In fact, I can still remember, we'd have customers come into the store and they'd say, what do these newfangled computer things do? Why would I want one of these? And I'd say, here, let me show you something. And I'd go over to that and I'd call up VisaCalc. And I'd say, give me 3 numbers. Yeah, any 3 numbers. Okay, 7, 8, 22. Type in 7 in a cell, 8, 22. I say, watch this. At sum, then I select those 3 cells and it would add them up. Whoa, that was cool. Now watch this. See that 7? I'm going to change that to 13. And the total changed. Come on, I'm expecting a little bit of whoa here. So, but it was cool. And we did it through direct interaction. We sat down with people and showed them how they could actually total up numbers or save recipes in a database or whatever. So that was back in 1978. Actually, I worked for that company in 82 and again in 84. So that was kind of at the point where the PCs were just taking off. Okay. Actually, sometimes we'd have customers that would come in and buy their applications, and if they had enough courage, they could actually install their own applications. Although, this is the wrong picture here. Why? Why is this the wrong picture? That is not a real floppy disk. I should have brought one. I'm sure I have some somewhere in my basement, but this is the newer floppy disk. We have these old really floppy disks. Okay, so that was Computerland back in 1978, maybe through 84 or something like that. Dell as a company took off in late 80s and in the 90s. They became the world's largest computer company. Their model was a little bit different. Their design was like this. You would select a computer. Whoa! Online. So you'd actually go to their website and pick the computer, pick the options you wanted, the memory, and things like that. Then what would happen next? What would be the next step? What's that? Okay. Then they would assemble it in surrogate interaction in Round Rock, Texas, or somewhere else. Then what? Okay. Sometimes you would set it up. It depends on which model you buy. But things like setting up your email account and your wireless connection or internet connection or things like that, you had to do that independently, usually after you bought it, unless you bought one of their pre-configured models. And then finally installing the applications. Now this is an interesting one because You can either buy the computer and install your applications, or you can actually buy some that come pre-installed. So this was kind of the Dell model. It was a little different than the Computerland model. But what impact do you think this had on Computerland? Whoa. For one thing, it was a lot more efficient. They have very few steps, or in fact almost no steps in the region of direct interaction unless you had a problem. So it was surrogate interaction, much more efficient. The customer got exactly what the customer wanted. Dell was able to offer more options because they had kind of centralized production there. And then you still had this surrogate interaction, so you had the ability for them to produce a custom system. So that was kind of the late 80s and through the 90s. Then we get to HP and Acer. And in fact, HP took over as the #1 computer producer in the world not long after that. How did their model work? How does HP produce computers? What's the first step? Please.
They make the computer.
Whoa! They assemble it independently with no input from customers. Then what?
And then they do the system setup and the configuration.
Okay. They may do some of that, but in fact, the customer will either go to a store and buy it, or maybe even more commonly, you go surrogate interaction and you purchase it. You can purchase the computers online or purchase them even at Walmart, which is largely surrogate interaction. Okay, and then as you suggested, now the interesting one is with the setup. Does anybody have an HP computer? Who set up your internet connection on it? Did it come set up or did you have to do it? Yeah, you probably had to do it. Yeah, the reason is that the internet connections vary. They have different logins and passwords and things like that. So in fact, it usually winds up that you have to set it up yourself, right? And then for installing applications, it comes with some applications on it like the Mind game and other useless things, you know, or the card game or whatever, junk like that. But if you want other applications, who installs them? Yeah, pretty much you have to install the applications yourself, and we go through that process. But you know what? This model that HP and Acer, and they actually have traded off between the #1 and #2 computer producers in the world. It was superior to the Dell model. Why? Why was this superior to the Dell model as of the late 90s and the early part of this century? Why was it superior? Please.
All the efficiencies were on the customer side.
That's exactly right. They took all the steps that had all of these customization things and they put them in the customer's process domain. So over here, they can produce things much cheaper. And in fact, computers like this, you can buy computers off the shelf for like $300 that if you go back 10 years ago, they would have cost you more than $1,000. They're standardized configurations, but it's a very efficient process. Finally, let's look at Apple. Do any of you have Apple products? Nobody has an Apple product? Do any of you have like iPods or any kind of Apple product? Who here doesn't have any Apple products? Oh, wow. That's a bigger group than I would have thought here. Okay, they still have growth potential here. All right, how does Apple work? Do we have anybody that's bought an Apple computer in the last 6 months? Okay, sir, here in the front. Did you buy an Apple computer in the last 6 months? On iPad. Good enough. Where did you buy it? Okay. Anybody buy anything at an Apple store? You did, ma'am? Okay, how did it work? What did you buy?
I bought my laptop.
Okay, you bought a laptop computer. So what step came first? So here's Apple, here's you. What step came first?
They made the computer.
Okay, they assembled that where? Sweatshop. I mean, not sweatshop. Taiwan. Foxconn or some other company made the computer independently. Then what? Then what happened? It got shipped to the store. Then, what step happened next?
I bought it.
You bought it. You selected your configuration. Now, I have a picture here of the Apple Store. Was that direct interaction or surrogate interaction?
Well, I was interacting with the applications, so I guess direct because it's Apple. It wasn't any other.
But what is an Apple Genius? Is it a person or is it a software?
It's a person.
Yeah, please. It's both. It's actually both, isn't it? Think about it. An Apple Store, when you walk into it, the first thing you see is just a bunch of tables with a bunch of computers on them, just begging you to come up. Try me, try me. So you interact with it surrogately, and then, as you mentioned, then you have the genius or the employee who comes up to you and says, hey, can I take some of your money? I mean, can I help you with something today? Right? Is that kind of what happened? And they did take your money. Then what happens next? Oh, so then you went home to set it up, right?
No, I set everything up there.
No. You bought the computer, and then you had to set it up. You took it home, right?
No, I opened the box there with the Apple Genius and we set it up together.
You set it up together? Whoa! So you and a genius. And this says personal setup. They have a setup station there. And in fact, people come in, I've observed this. In fact, it's just fascinating to watch what happens there. When the person buys the computer, they then sit down and interactively set that thing up. What about installing the applications? Have you installed any applications on it?
Most of them were there, but I did install the Microsoft Office
And how did you do that?
with the Apple Genius.
At the store?
Yeah.
Oh, have you installed any afterwards, after you got home?
Just like updates.
And how did you do that? Did you get a bunch of discs in the mail and did you stick them? No, how did you do that? How did you do the updates?
Just internet-based downloading.
Whoa! So what you're saying is installing and updating applications, you download them from the Apple Store. What do they call that? The App Store? And in fact, this App Store is part of the operating system. The current operating system is actually integrated into that. That if you want an app, be it Microsoft Office or any other of the 500,000 apps you can run on these things, you do it through the Apple Store. That is surrogate interaction. That's kind of an interesting design. That's kind of like Computerland, where you're doing things interactively. The difference is Computerland went bankrupt, and Apple is the most valuable company in the world right now, as of today. Isn't that interesting? Why is this the case? Let's do a quick comparison. Computerland, very interactive, but very inefficient. Dell, less interactive, a little bit more customized, took over the market. But then HP, Acer, they mass-produced and were even more efficient and took over the market leadership. Continuing on, talking about value, here we have Dell, we have HP, and then here we have Apple. Apple mass produces where customization isn't necessary. Apple sells very few products. And as a result, it's very simple and they can get tremendous economies of scale. Customers can select a configuration based on their needs, but you know what the killer step in the past has been? This configuration, this setup step, where we have to actually set up the machine. It can be horrible to get the machines to set up sometime, so they moved it to the region of direct interaction, allowing the expertise of the geniuses at the Apple Store to interact with the specific needs of the customers. And then finally, installing applications, they do that through surrogate interaction, thereby helping maintain the efficiencies that the Apple has in terms of developing the applications and distributing the applications and so forth. So I'm going to skip over this cost thing, but I think you get the idea. Dell had a model that had some costs, and they led to some problems with the setup. The superior Apple model put the setup in the region of direct interaction. Installing applications, they put in the region of surrogate interaction, and that provided a tremendous revenue stream for Apple. And the result of that is Apple customers are the most loyal customers of anybody that I've ever seen across any of the personal computer segments. Last two slides. Firms can gain strategic advantage through appropriate process positioning. Too much interaction can introduce waste. Too little interaction can reduce quality. And you must understand the value requirements of your chosen market segment. Let me jump to my final slide. This is the summary. Pcn analysis. Again, you have a handout. There are a few steps. Identify your value proposition. Consider customer requirements. Document the process domains, your process and your customers and others. Reconfigure the process to improve value. You redefine roles between the provider and the customer. And I have a website there on the back of this, and some of you, there's my book. It's actually available in the bookstore if any of you are interested. I hope this has been enlightening. This has been kind of a rapid-paced introduction to Pcn analysis. But you know what? This is the future. You're going to work in services. Services are designed to disappoint. By applying methods like Pcn analysis, we can actually develop services that are able to understand customer value propositions and deliver value in a consistent way. Thank you.